Oh, no, don't.
Yeah.
I think in the office they've got the stick ready to prod me, if it looks like I'm going over.
Oh, did anyone click on start meeting?
No.
It may well have been me, actually.
Oh, we're letting people in already.
Oh dear. Hold on. Is that what, shall I just stop recording for,
No, it's fine. It's just we basically got people in the room now.
oh, okay. My apologies.
It's okay.
I didn't realize I was that powerful.
I just made you a co-host. Okay, we
Oh,
only
no,
have like
just a minute.
4 people in. Anyone that's here will start in like 5-10 minutes. We just we'll wait until the time starts. So go and grab a coffee or a tea. Um, who's gonna share slides just so we can test it?
I was going to because I've got the slide deck open.
Anyone can share slides, by the way.
So if I that in presenter mode, no?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
I'll move you over there so I'm not constantly looking to the left. So I'm not constantly cricking my neck all the time. I didn't realize we were competing against the lunch and learn.
Oh, the drop-in session.
Mm.
Yeah. What is that? I think we put the webinar in and then the drop-in session was scheduled. But it's okay. The drop-in session will be recorded as well. Okay. Well, I don't want to start early because for anyone that joins on time, so we got 10 minutes, everything works, which is good.
Mhm.
Oh, there's still time.
Yeah. Okay. So we can just wait.
No, there's still time. Still time for it to go wrong, Marty. You know
Yeah.
that.
It's a voice of experience.
Yeah. As soon as the clock strikes 2, Wi-Fi goes out, power
Yeah.
goes down. You name it.
You know the
Not that,
saying,
not that we
every
haven't been there before.
every silver lining has a cloud.
We got many booked today, Marta.
Yeah. You went up a lot this week. 77.
Oh wow.
Okay.
Because it's really one of those subjects I wasn't sure whether it would resonate with people, so
Same. Yeah, same. But yeah, it's we do a lot of work on promoting the events and webinars we put on social, so I think really paying off. Yeah, which is good.
certainly seem to be covering more subjects.
Yeah, that's what we're trying.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're taking in the feedback of the webinars for the DSPT, and we're gonna from April we're gonna run them every 2 months.
Okay.
The national webinars, and then we'll expand on like other areas. Just because I don't think they're as useful anymore. I think they're useful
No.
to as many people. So running them on a monthly basis is too much.
I mean, I won't say it's been done to death, but I think particularly with the DSPT, it is sort of business as usual for a lot of providers, isn't it?
Exactly.
So it's how we can at least try and broaden the
the
awareness.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, sessions like this. We have an ODS code drop-in session next week as well. So yeah, things like that to
I
sort of
remember when all this started and ODS codes were like the dark arts. Didn't know what they were. I remember I think the first ever webinar we did, and I'm talking pre-DSPT, when we were we were just starting to talk about signing people up for NHS Mail.
All right.
And we had someone from NHS Digital there talking about it, and you need to complete the DSPT and you need an ODS code, you know, and everybody, no idea what an ODS code. He said, well, I can find out your ODS code. And he had a queue of providers like wanting to find out what their ODS code was because it was all new to them. And I think like having this magical code would like unlock various goodies. I mean, how wrong they were.
Yeah. Different now.
Different times, different times. I remember that webinar with fondness. It was a car crash.
Mm.
Our first test NHS Mail webinar. That was before Simon and Mark had even joined us. So we'll get a couple of like our members in, you know, who'll be kind to us. So just come along for an hour, you know, and we'll get your NHS Mail signed up. 4 hours later, we were all still running around. Nothing was working.
Yeah. Mm.
It was a mess.
Not the most stable of systems back then. It's better now, but it was very unstable back then, wasn't it?
It was like, you have to do what?
Oh.
Yeah, not brilliant. I will be imbibing coffee throughout to try and keep my throat lubricated.
Mm.
I feel you. I'm just getting out of the flu I had
It's just
last
so
week.
hard to shake, isn't it? You know, you get rid of most of it, and then you've always got one lingering symptom. I'll be glad when the winter's behind us. I hate winter.
Yes. It's just the dark nights. They seem so relentless. I'll be glad when you open the curtains to daylight as opposed to no, it's still dark. I don't like that. I don't like that.
No.
Yeah, and then you finish work and it's still dark.
And then it's still dark. You come home. You go to work in the dark. You come home in the dark.
Or you don't go, or you don't, as the case may be, if you work from
Yes.
home. No.
It's no fun. It's no compensation because you're still getting up in the dark, and then you know when you finish work, that's especially as we approach the winter equinox. It's dark at like 3:30. You know.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like polar night was, is it, Simon, in Norway?
No. That's something else. If anybody's experienced that, that's something else. The sun barely comes up, but it does give the most glorious. It's like the sky's on fire. It's the most glorious, beautiful, picturesque scene, especially as it sits behind the fjords and the mountains. It's just so breathtakingly beautiful.
Yeah,
I will
we went to Norway
I
last
got a little
month,
bit teary.
Oh,
Mm.
nice.
Got a little bit teary when I saw it. It was that stunningly beautiful. Yeah, so if you can get to Tromsø in Norway above the Arctic Circle, it's odd because you wouldn't think that life thrives so far north, and you actually forget because it's just a regular city. You forget that actually we're that far north. It's quite extraordinary. Yes, quite a wonderful experience. One of our best, Becky.
Yeah, no, definitely.
One of our best trips.
Mm.
Yeah, we've got 4 minutes until we start. For anyone that's just joined, we're just going to wait until we hit 2 o'clock and then we'll get started. We just started started the meeting a few minutes early. But if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. And just we can start answering questions if you want.
So I can't, because I'm screen sharing, I can't actually see any questions. So,
yeah, I'll manage them. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then Rihanna, when she joins, she'll manage them.
It's always one of the drawbacks, isn't it, with virtual meetings? You can't do everything. Or you need an additional screen. I've already got 2. I think a third one's like step too far.
Dan does that. He really
does he? Tell him I've just had one of those ultra wide monitors at home.
Oh,
it's like
nice.
49 inches wide.
Those are fancy.
It's
It
wonderful.
is. It is. I've seen it. He told me about it. Then when I actually saw it in the flesh, so to speak, it's this long, widescreen thing. It is very, very impressive. Very impressive. Lots of oohs and ahs, you know.
Yes, I wouldn't go back. No, no.
And here's me with my 22-inch
Never mind.
monitor, which
As I say, I've ordered you a larger monitor.
yes, bless him. This is old technology now. The screen still works just fine, but it uses one of those old SCART leads. It doesn't even have an HDMI
Yeah.
port in it. It's that it predates
Yeah.
that. It's that.
You have to
that
wind
old.
it up of a morning, don't you? You know, so it works.
Yes, and occasionally replace the hamster, you know.
Yeah.
Key, do you
Mhm.
want, given that you're sharing the presentation at the moment, once you've done your entry bits, could I ask you to stop your presentation and I'll pick up where you've left off and share my
No,
screen?
it's probably easy if you just tell me next slide, please.
Oh, okay.
Rather than swap sharing, I think that'd be easier.
People are starting to drop in. A couple more minutes and we start.
The disadvantage of doing that, Key, is that I'm going to be looking over here at my notes, so people are going to wonder
Not
what.
to worry. Not to worry.
So if it looks a little odd, that's the
That's
reason why.
okay.
People will be looking at the slides anyway, won't they? So it's
Yeah, I guess that's that.
sorry to break it to you, mate.
Yeah, sorry. People will be looking at me. It's always about
Not
me.
about you, you know. It's always about you.
As I said, I need to drop off early, but Rihanna will join at 1:30 to
Okay.
get on the questions. So if you have
Sure.
any questions, she'll be in the background as well. Yeah, one more minute and we'll get started. And the recording is being recorded on the cloud of our Zoom account, so we'll just keep going.
Well, I shall.
Okay, over to you, Kieran. We'll get started.
Okay, thank you, Marta. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kieran Broadbent. I'm Chief Executive Officer of the West Midlands Care Association. We're the local support organisation for a large chunk of the West Midlands, as it sort of says on the tin. And I'd also like to introduce my colleagues Simon and Mark from our digital delivery team, who will be helping out today. So we've been involved with supporting providers complete the DSPT for, well, longer really than I want to think about. When we started this, you only needed to complete 14 questions, and hey presto, you qualified for NHS Mail. Admittedly, the questions back then had been written by IT geeks who never saw the light of day. So part of our job was actually to decode what they meant as well. So now, of course, we concentrate on getting to standards met. But what we want to look at today is what's beyond standards met. So looking at the additional questions of the DSPT and whether or not, it's actually a worthwhile thing to do. I could say no, and that would be a very brief presentation, but that's not what it's about. I know Marta would absolutely kill me if I said that. So let's assume that we actually do want to complete some of the questions. So looking at standards exceeded. So why should you complete them? Firstly, should emphasize we are not saying you need to complete all of them. Some of them are very technical. and as you'll see, are probably beyond the scope of the average care provider. And also, to be very clear, completing all of the additional questions does not get you to standards exceeded. That requires some form of external verification, usually Cyber Essentials Plus or ISO 27001. I also think it's wise to remember that standards met means that the NHS thinks your current policies and procedures are adequate. Lovely word, isn't it? Adequate. But standards will inevitably get tighter and more stringent as we go on. We're just coming to the end, of course, of the DISC program, where the government was encouraging care providers to actually take up digital care record software. And we've now achieved that target with 80% of care providers using some sort of digital care platform. The new government, of course, has stated that digitization is going to be one of their priorities. One of the ways that they hope to improve health and social care. And so I think we will continue to see investment in these areas. Indeed, now that we've got to that 80% adoption target, I think we're going to see real movement over the next few years towards true shared care records. And as a sector, you know, we're continuing to collect and share even greater quantities of personal and sensitive data. Standards will get tighter. So I think looking at some of the non-mandatory questions of the DSPT now is a great way of actually getting ahead of the curve, so that any new standards that actually come into place over the next couple of years hopefully won't be too difficult to implement. And who knows, maybe we can actually show our health colleagues a few things or two. So if we actually look at some of the non-mandatory questions, so why bother actually completing them if they're not a requirement? I think the main thing to remember, they can actually enhance your overall data protection standards. And we think some of these are actually fairly easy to implement. Some aren't. So the purpose of today's webinar is to look at the non-mandatory questions. We'll go through them one by one, the ones we think, yes, we think the average care provider can do these within the normal sort of run-of-the-mill stuff, which they're already doing. And then we'll look at some of the ones which we think are a little bit more technical. And you might disagree with us on our findings. You might think, no, we can't do that, or we don't think that's technical at all. It'll very much just sort of come down to your personal circumstances, of course. But this is what we think, you know, and as I said, we've been doing this for a few years. So, you know, we're pretty confident, you know, we've come to some fairly good conclusions about some of the questions. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Simon now. So just to give you a little bit of variety, he's going to cover the first couple of questions within staffings and roles and policies and procedures. So ready when you are, Si.
Okay, thanks. Now, folks, just to let you know, I'm going to be looking over my screen and my notes over here. So if it looks like I'm ignoring you, I'm not. It's just that as an aid memoir, I'll be looking at my notes over here. Kieran's actually got hold of the presentation, so I'm not able to make the changes here. Okay, so as an aid memoir, you'll recall that the toolkit is split into 4 sections. Questions that are grouped under 4 separate headings: staffing and roles, policies and procedures, data security, and IT systems and devices. As per Kieran's previous comments, we've chosen a variety of questions which we think are relatively easy for you to answer, in spite of the fact you don't, strictly speaking, have to. If we just look at this question in staffing and roles, which is the first section in the toolkit, question 3.3.1 then, provide details of any specialist data security and protection training undertaken. We actually think this is relatively easy for you to achieve. As Kieran mentioned, there's rapid digitization of the sector, and that's going to be a major thing that's going to occur in the next few years. With respect to this question, you need to be thinking about things like training in your use of things like a digital social care record system, but also other digital systems that have come online, like proxy access and remote monitoring. Best practice would also include any training that any members of staff may have undertaken should they become a data security and protection lead. It might also include details of any additional training as identified by your data security training needs analyses. And that might include things like staff who've undertaken training to become a Caldecott Guardian. But just remember, you don't need to become a Caldecott Guardian, especially if you are a smaller organization. Next slide, please, Key. Okay, so we're moving then into the next section, policies and procedures. So if we take a look at this question, 1.1.6, your organization has reviewed how it asks for and records consent to share personal data. Okay, so this does center around consent, and generally consent under data protection law is not appropriate in health and care settings. But there are some circumstances where it's necessary, so for example, mailing lists. An exception to this, of course, is the National Data Opt-out policy, which is only applicable for a relatively small number of care providers in any event. Consent under the common law of consent under common law duty of confidentiality, however, is more frequently applicable. So, for example, an individual must provide their consent to share information with their carer. So here, it's important to provide details on your processes for gaining this consent in the comments optional box in that question. You'd use a consent form there, and consent forms are easy to set up with many templates available for you to choose from. So it's for this reason that we think this is another relatively easy one for you to answer. Now, care providers should know how they acquire consent to service users' data as part of their data management processes. Next slide, please, Key. Moving on then to question 10.2.2. Contracts with all third parties that handle personal information are compliant with ICO guidance. Okay, so care providers have to keep a suppliers list and ideally bundle that with their data register as part of standards met in the toolkit. However, it's not too much of a stretch as part of that process to review the contracts that you have with suppliers to be able to confirm compliance with Article 28 of GDPR. So things to look out for would be external certification with the supplier. And again, that's going to be relatively easy to do. Now, for those of you who haven't memorized the articles of GDPR, Article 28 states, and I quote, where processing is to be carried out on behalf of a controller, i.e. the care provider, the controller shall use only processors, namely the supplier, providing sufficient guarantees to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures in such a manner that processing will meet the requirements of this regulation and ensure the protection of the rights of the data subject. Yeah. Next slide, please, Key. To 10.2.5. All suppliers that process or have access to health or care personal confidential information have completed a data security and protection toolkit or equivalent. As it turns out, providers can easily check with their suppliers or external websites if they've completed the data security and protection toolkit or have equivalent. So, for example, the quality standard ISO 27001 or maybe Cyber Essentials Plus. So again, that's a relatively easy win for you. It's also good practice to use suppliers who have been through an external certification process because it proves that they take this as seriously as you do. Okay, so we're now moving into the data security set of questions. So if we just take a look at this one, question 1.3.6, what are the top 3 data and cybersecurity risks in your organization, and how does your organization plan to reduce those risks? The fact is that all organizations have risks, and you should be able to identify what they are. So thinking about your responses to all of the questions in the toolkit that you've answered already, consider which 3 areas carry the most risk for your organization. Now, as it turns out, this used to be part of the standard MET set of questions. And as an organization, the Care Association were quite surprised that this was taken out. This was back when we were doing more in-person workshops, so pre-COVID, to be honest. And this was one of the questions that always generated a fair amount of debate. So it was actually pretty useful. The question does have its problems, of course, as by its very nature, the answer might be perceived to be somewhat erring on the negative. But what we tend to encourage is to approach it from the care provider's perspective of treating this as part of business continuity planning. And that's something that you should already be familiar with, and therefore this question should be relatively easy for you to answer. Completing the toolkit itself does actually help to assist with identifying your major risks, both to your data and your cybersecurity. And you could actually also do this as part of an internal audit of your data and cybersecurity measures in any event. So moving on to question 5.2.1. Are the actions to address problem processes being monitored and assurance given to the senior team? This is actually just a process, and it should be part of normal management and management reporting, should I say. So here you'll explain the governance around escalation of any issues and findings to the board or equivalent, such as through reports and briefing notes, especially during the last 12 months. Now, arguably, part of the remit of your data security and protection lead or go-to person who takes overall responsibility for data protection and cybersecurity in the organization, that should actually form part of their remit by default. Question 6.3.1. If you had a data security incident, was it caused by a known vulnerability? Now, again, this is one of those questions which is relatively easy to answer because frankly, you've either had an incident or you haven't. The question does, however, highlight the importance of staff training because they need to know about cybersecurity breaches, what constitutes one, and what action they need to take in response. So again, that forms part of internal training. Question 6.3.5. Have you had any repeat data security incidents within the organization during the past 12 months? Again, like the previous question, you either have or you haven't. A repeat incident is defined as an exploitation of the same vulnerability on the same systems or different ones that occurs within 3 calendar months of a previous occurrence. So if this has happened, you'll need to provide details. Best practice here would stipulate that the data security protection lead or your go-to person would need to review procedures, training, and possibly your existing IT systems. If necessary, you'd need to carry out a risk assessment, especially of the incident, to mitigate this occurring again in the future. Excuse me, let me just wet my whistles, 1 second. Question 7.1.1. Organizations understand the health and care services they provide. Now, the fact is this one sounds deceptively simple, and indeed it should be relatively easy for most providers to answer. What you're looking to cover here are a handful of things. Firstly, what the key operational services are. Secondly, what technologies and services their operational services rely on to remain available and secure. Thirdly, what other dependencies the operational services have? So, for example, power, cooling, data, people, and so on. And fourthly, the impact of loss of availability of the service. Now, like the previous questions, this falls under the remit of business continuity. And that's actually a big theme, generally speaking. So your go-to person or data security and protection lead has to identify the organizations that they rely on to deliver their own care provider service and also implement backup and business continuity plans. Question 7.1.3. You understand the resources and information that will be needed if there is a data security incident, and arrangements are in place to make these resources available. So with this now, staff should be trained in how to identify and report a data security incident. This is crucial. And certainly be at least encouraged to speak up should they be concerned that one has occurred. Again, your data security and protection lead or go-to person needs to become familiar with engaging with the Information Commissioner's Office for guidance on how best to respond. Question 7.2.2. From the business continuity exercise, explain what issues and actions were documented with names of actionees listed against each item. We've spent a lot of time talking about how many of these questions should be incorporated into your business continuity planning, so it is appropriate that this question should now draw direct attention to what you've done following the testing of it. Question 10.3.1. List of data security incidents, past or present, with current suppliers who handle personal information. Okay, so all current ongoing incidents are listed, and all historical incidents, which is up to 2 calendar rolling years, do be sure to redact any sensitive information here as well, folks.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I think this is probably a good opportunity to pause. Unfortunately, I can't, because I'm doing the slide showing, I can't actually see whether there's any questions in the chat. So, Marta, is there any questions cropped up?
No, no questions so far. We just had a couple of questions on ODS codes, but nothing related to this, and I answered it. So,
Okay,
yeah,
great.
go ahead.
Okay. Do you want me to take over for a bit, Si?
Yes, please, just give my voice a rest. Thank you.
Okay. Right, so we've gone through quite a large part of the toolkit. So going to look at the largest section, of course, which is IT systems and devices. Many of the non-mandatory questions for staffing and roles, policies and procedures and data security, in our opinion, we think are actually fairly straightforward to implement for most care providers. I think, as Simon's already explained, a lot of them are just about policy or about procedure or about business continuity. And if you've already written policies to get you to standards met, it's not that much of a stretch to actually cover off these additional questions. In fact, a lot of them, you probably have done it anyway when you've been drafting your policy. So you can quite comfortably go ahead and actually answer those questions. Now, IT systems and devices, of course, though, may require an additional level of technical knowledge, may involve some additional investment. But even within these, we do feel that there are some which we think are fairly easy to achieve. So looking at 4.2.2, which is provide a summary of data security incidents in the last 12 months caused by a mismatch between user role and system accesses granted. This is usually about an incident, either where the staff members' rights to the data were too high or too low, but we do not need to name individuals. The aim should be to identify data breaches that occurred directly as a result of inappropriate systems access levels. So for a good example, for instance, is where everybody within the organization has been given systems administrator access by default, just because that's when laptops are set up, for instance, for new. It's very easy to follow the step-by-step procedures, and it does that for you. Whereas, of course, you might not find it appropriate that everybody needs that level of access, but it happens all the time. So you need to provide the correct level of access to all systems for each user, providing additional cybersecurity and data protection training, if that's relevant. Note this in their training needs analysis. A record of this will also prove useful in assigning appropriate access, as insufficient access to perform a role can be used as a justification, of course, for password sharing. Like some previous questions, I think this is a very easy one to answer, particularly if there have been no incidences. So it's one of those you could actually, if you've been no incidences, a bit like the data breach question in the standards met questions, if it's not happened, you can still answer it. And I think this one's just the same. So looking at 4.3.1, have all the administrators of the organization's IT system signed an agreement to hold them accountable to higher standards. This might be familiar to some of you because it used to be in the standards met questions a while ago. People within your organization who are IT systems administrators probably have access to more information than other staff. So therefore, it's appropriate that they need to be held accountable in a formal way to a higher standard of confidentiality than others. This requirement applies to IT systems administrators working in external companies as well, who support your organization's IT systems. This formal agreement could be part of a job description, or it could be part of a contract, of course, with an external IT support company. If your organization does not use any IT systems, which is probably unlikely these days, then you, of course, can also tick the box and say not applicable. But as I say, that's highly unlikely in this day and age. They might, however, be using an external supplier, as we've said, to support them with their IT system. So the provider will need to ensure that there is a formal agreement in place with their supplier. And if they have access to the data held on those systems, alternatively, they might have an employee who acts as their IT administrator. And they should have clauses in their employment contract outlining their obligations, which would reflect their higher level of responsibility. So again, this is more about process. It's more about good practice. If you've got someone who is your systems administrator, that they should be held accountable for and they should be aware of, and appropriate levels of access should be in place. So only they can access that data and it's not widely accessible by your general workforce. So looking at 4.3.3, have all staff been notified that their system use could be monitored? Again, very easy. This is all about process. So you just have to ensure that staff are informed and that they understand that the system use can be monitored and recorded. And the notification method is periodic. So obviously it's like probably at least yearly. This should form part of staff training in any event and scheduled as a reminder to staff. I think a lot of staff don't realize, that their employers are quite entitled to read their emails if it's a work email platform. And if there's sensitive data going around, it's very important to make sure that data isn't being abused. If we look at 8.4.2, all infrastructure is running operating systems and software packages that are patched regularly and as a minimum in vendor support. This covers software running on computers that are connected to or are capable of connecting to the internet, generally speaking. Obviously, it's probably rare these days that you've got a computer that doesn't connect to the outside world in some way. Could include those as well, but for most providers, if your automatic updates are used, this should be an easy one for you to actually say you adhere to, particularly if you're using like well-known software providers such as, Microsoft, Apple, Google, those sort of companies, because as part of their normal support package, they provide regular updates and security patches. Obviously, if you're using something a bit more specific, it might be a little bit more tricky. But again, we think generally speaking, this is one of those which is quite easy for most providers to actually adhere to. 9.3.8. The organization maintains a register of medical devices connected to its network. Again, if it's not applicable, an easy one to say yes or no to. If it is applicable, the register should include the name of the vendor, the maintenance arrangements, and whether network access is given to the supplier or maintainer. Again, this could be something you include in your data register as part of your standards met questions. But again, very, very easy to actually maintain and stay on top of. 9.5.1. All devices in your organization have technical controls that manage the installation of software devices. This might be, as I've mentioned, systems administrator access. So the only person who can actually install software on your devices is the systems admin by using their own unique login. There might need to be exceptions to this. And if there are, you need to record and detail what those exceptions are and how you manage them. It might also require, of course, that if you use mobile devices, and of course by that I mean also include tablets, laptops, that you have some sort of MDM software in, mobile device management software. So you can also remotely lock out devices if needed. Again, we think this is quite an easy one to achieve for most providers. MDM software is very easy to come across. There's a lot of good free platforms out there. And as best practice, all your devices within your organization should have at least two accounts on there. And one of those should be the systems administrator, who should be the only person who's actually allowed to install software. So I'm just going to pause again, just in case there's any further questions.
Nothing's come through, Kieran.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, I think it's good. There's more people in the webinar, so it's definitely good. No one's left.
Good. Okay, so those are all the questions we think are fairly easy to achieve. If you're completing your toolkit to standards met every year fairly easily, then these additional questions are not much of a stretch. They're probably part and parcel of what you're doing anyway. Now, obviously, we haven't even covered all the questions yet. So we're just going to quickly look through the additional questions, which in our view require a level of technical knowledge, which maybe the average care provider probably doesn't have. It might be, of course, if you use an external IT company for your IT support, they might have this knowledge. So by all means, don't believe this is a list of things you cannot do. It'll very much depend on your own personal circumstances, your own level of technical knowledge, and of course, the support structure which surrounds your particular care service. Okay. So rather than go through them in great depth, because like we say, we do think these are the technical ones. And surprise, surprise, they're all in IT systems and devices. So 4.4.1, the person with responsibility for IT confirms that IT administrator activities are logged and those logs are only accessible to appropriate personnel. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? The person with responsibility for IT basically confirms that the IT administrator activities are logged and those logs are only accessible to appropriate personnel, such as systems administrators, senior management, etc. Diarising such activities can be a record as to who has authorised changes to accesses and systems and when they have occurred. So it can be a useful tool for the audit of activities. So appropriate rollback measures can be taken if required. With this one, some software has that included within the back end of some of the packages. There's like a systems administrator platform, where they can actually see who's logged onto the system when they've made changes, etc. But other platforms might not have that. So it's one of those things. It will depend on the technical sophistication, we think, of the software you have, and also how comfortable, of course, whoever does your systems administration feels about doing this. 6.2.6, the number of phishing emails reported by staff per month. hopefully you all know what a phishing email is. Obviously, that's where an email comes in purporting to be from someone and usually looks to extract some sort of data. We think this is a really difficult one to actually monitor, because you're asking your staff to actually sort of try and physically keep note of emails, which probably most of them just refer to as junk anyway. Good spam, anti-spam software in most email clients these days will actually trap a lot of phishing emails. So you can monitor the numbers that way. But we think, you know, any ones that actually get through, unless you've got a very robust reporting system in place, it's quite a difficult one. We're not saying that, of course, that your staff shouldn't be aware of what a phishing email is, and training shouldn't be given as to what to do if they think they've had one. But we think this is actually quite a difficult one to actually monitor on a regular basis. 7.3.6, are your backups kept separate from your network, i.e. offline, or are they in a cloud service designed for this purpose? No. Backups are very important, of course. They are included within the standards met questions. Cloud syncing services such as OneDrive, SharePoint, Google Drive, etc. They shouldn't be your only backup. No, I'm not saying they're unreliable. Of course, generally speaking, they are extremely reliable, but they can go down. You know, it does happen where you have a national, regional, even worldwide outage sometimes of cloud platforms, even the likes of Microsoft and Apple. It does actually happen. So it's always worthwhile having a backup. And that stored backup should not be permanently connected to your network. There's good guidance from the National Cybersecurity Centre in what to do about backups. So we talk about this all the time when we do our DSPT webinars. Providers meeting this criteria would also provide an extra level of protection to their data integrity. So a great deal of gain can actually be made from ensuring you have a good backup system. We actually suggest a combination of cloud and something physical, like a network attached storage device maybe. And you could always keep that in your office, or even keep it, say, in, you know, the manager's home. That's what we do here. You know, we're very much cloud reliant, but I've actually got a network attached storage system in my home office as a backup. So if we ever lost our cloud service for whatever reason, we've got an offsite backup which we can actually recover from. It's not difficult to achieve, but we've included it in this part of the list because it does require a level of investment, and it also requires a bit of a level of technical knowledge to actually get it up and started. Good backups should run in the background without you having to worry about them. But very often setting it up does take a little bit of donkey work. So that's the reason we've included it on this particular list. So 8.1.2, does the organization track and record all end user devices and removable media assets? What does that actually mean? So do you hold an up-to-date list of all your end user devices and removable media? So what are those? Well, end user devices, laptops, mobile phones, tablets. Removable media, USB sticks. Very few people use discs anymore. In fact, my laptop doesn't even have a disk drive in it. But obviously, USB sticks are still fairly ubiquitous. This could be, again, be part of your data register, and it could prove very useful for the purpose of asset management and audit trails. Again, we've included it on this particular list because particularly for things like USB sticks, you can put software on laptops to block USB sticks from actually downloading data. You might think that's worthwhile. You might think it's not. If you do, again, it involves an investment. You have to buy some software. You have to implement the software. So that's why we've included it on this list. But it's actually one of those things which probably isn't that difficult to implement if you did actually want to do it. 8.3.2. How often in days is automatic patching typically being pushed out to remote endpoints? Again, we're getting technical, aren't we, here with some of the language? So remote endpoints being those devices or computers that are not on the core network. So usually anybody who works from home or mobile workers. In order to satisfy this particular one, you'd have to state the usual number of days between one wave of remote patching and the next. Again, we think this is one of those things which is actually quite difficult to manage and quantify for most care providers. I think particularly if you're a care home, your mobile devices probably never leave the premises, so they're more easy to look after. Dom care providers obviously looking after remote workforce. If you've got mobile device management software on your devices, a good platform allows you to actually push out software updates, or if you need to push out a new piece of software altogether. But again, it involves that investment in that software platform. So that's, again, we've included it on this list. And 8.4.1 is all your infrastructure protected from common cyber attacks through secure configuration and patching. For this one, you'd need to explain at a summary level where it is not possible to apply these measures and explain any mitigations. For most providers, if you're using automatic updates, as we've mentioned before, this should be a fairly easy one. But if it's not possible, then it's going to be difficult to describe without some technical knowledge. So again, that's why we've included it here. And 8.4.3, you maintain a current understanding of the exposure of your hardware and software to publicly known vulnerabilities. Good antivirus software should be a minimum requirement and should therefore be achievable. What we always say on our webinars, though, good antivirus does not include free versions. Free versions are usually stripped down. They provide a minimum level of protection for what a good paid for antivirus package will cost you. It'll repay itself several times over if you did have some sort of vulnerability. So we've got a few more to cover off. 9.2.1, the annual IT penetration testing is scoped in negotiation between the board person with delegated responsibility for data security, business and testing team, including a vulnerability scan and checking that all networking components have had their default passwords changed to a high strength password. Does anybody know what that even actually means? What that's actually saying is, in the comments field on the question, we'd state the date and outline the scope of the organization's penetration test. And that would have to be done by some sort of external company. A penetration test is where you ask an external IT specialist to attack your network and just to see just how easy it is to get past your firewall, get past your antiviral software, just how easy it is to plant a phishing attack, for instance. It's quite a useful thing to have. It is readily available. Funnily enough, we're just about to start a pilot scheme ourselves in the West Midlands, along with several other regions through Better Security, Better Care, to do just that sort of thing. So you would be done in the last 12 months, and one possibility, Cyber Essentials Plus, because Cyber Essentials Plus will do a penetration test obviously there's a cost involved with this. That's why we've put it on here. There is a level of technical knowledge involved. You need an external company to do it, and there is a cost, but it's not unachievable. 9.2.3. The person responsible for IT has reviewed the results of the latest penetration testing with an action plan for its findings. The penetration test will provide an action plan, and it's important for the management team to actually review their action plan and put in place any of its recommendations. There's no point in sitting gathering dust on a shelf, and if you've paid that money for it to be done, it makes sense to actually put those recommendations in place. This one's very much tied to the previous one, so that's why we've included it in this list. 9.3.1, all web applications are protected and not susceptible to common security vulnerabilities, such as described in the top 10 Open Web Application Security Project vulnerabilities. No, I'm sure you all know what that means. So what it's saying is confirm that the organization has a secure software development lifecycle. Now, that probably isn't going to be relevant to a lot of care providers. It's unlikely you'll be going developing software yourself. It might be, of course, though, that you use providers or you're testing software for providers. So what you're looking to do is align with industry good practice, such as OWASP, to reduce the risk of code vulnerabilities or web application vulnerabilities being exploited. Again, we think this is one of those which is very technical, very specialist, not going to be relevant or applicable to most care providers. 9.3.4, the organization ensures that changes to its authoritative DNS entries can only be made by strongly authenticated and authorized administrators. Now, DNS is all to do with your email servers, generally speaking. We would normally assume this would be handled by someone at a systems administrator level, but would question if most providers have this level of expertise and knowledge. Again, it might be something you pay an external IT company to do for you to make sure that your DNS for your emails are secure. So again, it is achievable, probably if you go an external IT company. 9.3.5, the organization understands and records all IP ranges in use across the organization. This should be reviewed regularly. The reviews can be manual or automatic, and it would normally assume that this would be, again, handled by someone at systems administrator level. But one of those we question whether your average care provider would have this level of knowledge. But again, a good external IT supplier would know this. The reason it asks to do this is most computer systems operate within a range of IP addresses. And if you get a sudden erroneous one, it might be an attack or someone's actually trying to spoof your network. So that's the reason it's asked you that question. And 9.3.6, we're nearly there. The organization protects its data in transit, including email, using appropriate technical controls such as encryption. TLS where used would be a well-configured TLS 1.2 or better. Again, this is a technical standard. So again, we'd normally assume that most care providers would know what that means. But if you, again, are using an external IT support company, they should be able to handle that one for you. And last slide on this, I promise. 9.4.4. So security deficiencies uncovered by assurance activities are assessed, prioritized, and remedied where necessary in a timely and effective way. This is only really possible with something like Cyber Essentials Plus because it involves external verification. And again, we've put it here because it needs, there's a monetary cost involved with it. 9.5.3, you closely and effectively manage changes in your environment, ensuring that network and system configurations are secure and documented. So this requires locking out devices with systems administrator accounts and mobile device management software. Again, very achievable, but it does, again, require an investment in software and money. And finally, you'll be glad to hear, we've got 9.6.1. One or more firewalls or similar network devices have been installed on all the boundaries of your organization's internal networks. A firewall, if you don't know what it is a hardware device or piece of software which constrains network traffic to your network. The most common ones are between the internet and your internal network. There's normally a firewall built into your router. It's important it's configured correctly to stop unauthorized access from outside your network, so not anyone can just get in without passwords. Very much will depend on the complexity of your network. Most, as I say, modern routers have a firewall built into them, and good antivirus software, again, offers another level of protection. So this should be achievable, I think, for most organizations with relatively simple networks. But if you've got a complicated IT setup, then again, a degree of technical knowledge and investment is probably needed. So those are all the questions we think. Some are achievable, some aren't, but they require either a level of knowledge or a level of investment from the provider. Are there any questions so far?
Hi, Kieran. Yes, we do have a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
One I've partially answered, which was on somebody said that they already deliver training on phishing, as they're starting to notice an increase in this type of scam, and they asked for any recommended training for their team to do. I let them know that we have an e-learning training, which is on data protection more broadly, but I don't know if there's anything that you're aware of in the sector or more broadly on phishing or anything like that.
As I say, Cyber Essentials also looks at phishing, but of course there is a cost attached to Cyber Essentials, but they will actually do a phishing penetration test. You know, they'll send phishing emails to your network and see whether your network's configured in the correct way to actually block most of them. So that might be something, you know, people want to consider, but obviously there is a cost attached. But I think, you know, the training, the Digital Care Hub is very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just launched a new one for Leeds as well, which I didn't mention in my answering of your question. Apologies. Yes, if you have data protection leads in your organization, we did literally just a few days ago launch that. So there's that as well. And then the second question is, it seems that the good practice such as OWASP, that's P for Papa, link in the DSPT doesn't work. And the person's asked if anyone has a link that works for that.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, Key, I just thought I'd go into our demo toolkit just to see if it might be an isolated incident or if it actually fact is widespread. And I'm again getting an error message page. It does give guidance on it says contact us. Or if this error occurred as a result of accessing a link on this site, then please inform us of the problem using the contact us link, quoting the error reference given below. It would seem that they have a process in place, but I'm surprised that this hasn't been picked up before now.
I think that's something we can raise with John's team though, can't we? You know, if it's a dead link on the DSPT.
Yeah.
And that was all the questions.
Okay, great. Right, so in conclusion then, Are the additional questions worth answering? I think yes, resounding yes. Are some of the questions easy to comply with? Should the answer not be applicable? Definitely yes. But then here lies the rub. Like the rest of the DSPT, it is not effective if approached as a tick box exercise. That does not stimulate questioning and, if necessary, testing of your processes. So answering all the non-mandatory questions does not get you to standards exceeded, and standards exceeded is not a contractual requirement. So why bother? There are many reasons we can think of. Again, as I mentioned earlier, as we process more and more sensitive data and care itself becomes much more reliant on technology and connectivity, it's inevitable that these standards in the near future are going to become more stringent. And so it does make sense to start getting ahead of the curve now. The DSPT is very much a evolving document. As you know, if you've been doing it for a few years, you know, questions are added, questions are taken out. Every couple of years, it usually has a major revamp. I imagine we're probably due for one of those again. It's been about 3 years since the last major revamp of the DSPT. So I think it just makes sense to actually sort of like trying to raise our game now. It should be remembered, as I said, standards met is a minimum standard. In an ideal world, all providers would be standards exceeded, but you know the market's just too large and too fragmented for that to happen. And we're not yet at a level as a sector of digital maturity. But a data breach or denial of service attack would have really profound consequences to the viability and smooth running of your business. So I think spending time and, if necessary, a little bit of money on complying with many, if not all, of all the non-mandatory questions, you'll really begin to flesh out the minimum standards that you already achieved and add that extra level of protection against these sort of attacks. As we said, you know, completing all the non-mandatories doesn't get you to standards exceeded. That requires external verification through Cyber Essentials Plus or ISO 27001. But going beyond the standards questions does give you an increased peace of mind that your data security and protection processes are as good as they can be, and will get you ahead if and when the current minimum standards are increased. So that's it from us. I hope you found today useful. Are there any sort of final questions?
Not that I can see, no. Thank you so much, Kieran. And
Okay, no,
Simon.
thank you.
Welcome.
So that's it. If there's no other further questions, I'll say thank you for your interest today. And we haven't actually got our details on there, but if you did want to sort of like contact us directly, more than happy to take questions. You can either get us through hello@Digital Care Hub and I'll forward them on, or you can contact us directly through inquiries@wmca.digital. Thank you.
I'll send out the email when I send through the recording.
Cheers.
Thank you both so much, and I'll just go ahead and end the webinar.
Okay, thanks, Vienna.